Hey, what's up? I'm Josh, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Acoustics 3030i bookshelf speakers. These were sent out by Acoustics, but they are not paying or asking me to say anything good or bad. All thoughts and opinions are always my own. So the system behind me, I'm going to talk about it briefly because I know a few people care. My source is going to be the recently reviewed FIO R7. You can find a link to that review down in the channel below. That is going XLR into the LA90 discrete amplifier, which I have not yet reviewed, but will soon. And that is shooting out into these bookshelf speakers, which are on Acoustics stands, which were also supplied by them. So thanks for supplying those. These speakers are visually beautiful. The attention to the exterior detail here is pretty high for the price category that these are coming in at. One of the cooler build components here is the binding posts in the back. I think they just look visually very cool. One thing I don't love so much about the design here though, is that just looking at it on a web page, it is kind of hard to tell exactly how big these things are. You really have to pay attention to dimensions, measure that out in your room, on your speaker stands, and see if it's really going to fit your particular circumstance, because they are bigger than you might think they are. So these are what I would consider to be like mid-fi speakers in terms of price range. These are listed at $550 a pair. Now the actual cabinet structure here is, I don't think, the best. It's definitely not super heavy. It doesn't have a super dense feeling to it. Now when it comes to acoustics, it seems like there's examples of why this is good, of why this is bad. It really just depends on how the company plays with their cabinet design, but it doesn't feel like you get a super dense kind of material source here. So this is a two-way reflex bookshelf speaker with a 6.5-inch woofer and a 1-inch tweeter. And this speaker has a listed frequency response of 46 hertz to 30,000 hertz. When it comes to amplifying this is a fairly easy to drive 6 ohms and about 88 dB. So it's really not the hardest speaker to drive at all. This has a listed power rating of 25 to 75 watts. You really do not need a super powerful amplifier. In fact, we're going to be doing an audiophile build with this shortly of a pretty compact little desktop amplifier that you can use with these things, and it sounds really wonderful. And that's a whole system that will get you in under about $1,000, which is pretty sick. For sound quality, this is a very, very enjoyable speaker. It definitely leans on the warmer side. It's not what I would consider to be a speaker that is going after technicality first. This speaker is more oriented for what I would suggest to be home usage, specifically for people who watch a lot of movies. I think this is going to be really good for that sort of home use environment. This is definitely not a very fatiguing speaker, and the main driving force of this speaker is going to be that 6.5-inch woofer that is putting out a pretty solid bass, mid-bass, and lower mid-range output. It actually sounds quite wonderful. I like this driver a lot. Now, the listed frequency response goes down to 46 hertz, and I would say that like you can expect a solid 50 to 60 hertz. Absolutely. It also, depending on the room environment, can either have a lot of mid-bass bloom, or it can have almost no mid-bass bloom if you're in a very, very good kind of room, treated environment. It can really clean that mid-bass up. So it really depends on what environment you're throwing into this, like every other speaker. But that is a potential here. It's definitely not anemic in the bass response. So you could get bloaty and boxy pretty easily with the wrong room environment. In terms of its actual capable performance though, this thing sounds very, very clean and quite deep, but it definitely hits a solid drop off, and it's quite noticeable. The song When We Were Young by Adele has this intro bass note to it. In the intro to the song, there's a bass playing, and it's fluctuating in frequency, of course. And some of the frequencies sound perfect on this. They just hit with the right quality, the right presence, the right attack, the right pressure. And then there's a really low note. The lowest one they hit, it hits that drop off and it's almost inaudible. It's really funny. So if you want to hit the lowest of low notes, like any bookshelf speaker, don't let any hi-fi reviewer tell you that it will cover all the way down to 20 hertz. That does not exist for bookshelf speakers. Don't expect any of them of this size to do that. So if you want to hit that, simple fact is you need a subwoofer. But if you don't want a subwoofer, similar to the Bucarts I reviewed a while ago, I think that the bass response will fulfill a lot of people, especially in smaller room environments. And yes, people who are searching a full range 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz experience will want a sub, but I think that most people will be genuinely content with the bass quality and quantity coming out of here. And on that sub $1,000 audiophile system we're going to be building with this thing, which is not the system behind me, that actually has a bass adjustment which works just deliciously with the speaker. It's really good. Now, because the crossover is happening at 2.4 kilohertz, a lot of the lower mid-range is handled by this woofer. And I actually think that this woofer is a very well-performing woofer in terms of bass response up until it hits its limits, which is fine. And then, of course, that lower mid-range. Lower-oriented vocalists can hit with so much body and presence and sound very alive and have a relatively defined edge to them, which is harder to do for lower end vocalists. A more defined edge on the vocalist is easier for higher end vocalists, like a lot of females are really easy to define, and males tend to be more broad and kind of soft on the edges. This is relatively defined there. So an artist like Woodkid or some of the individuals from the Pentatonics group, those hit very well here. A lot of rock also hits very well. The song Sound of Silence from Disturbed, amazing. The bass and the mid-range also have a decent flexibility in terms of positioning, so they can sound very wide and open, or they can sound very kind of solid and thick and really present and kind of coming at you with a lot of pressure. So I like that dexterity. The tweeter. I don't love the tweeter. The tweeter has some performance characteristics that I don't find particularly pleasing all the time. Now, again, I told you before that this leans a little bit away from technicality, a little bit more into warmth, and that's one of the things that I don't personally love. I like a not fatiguing but technical speaker, and there's a lot of speakers around this price and cheaper that are far more technical in terms of treble detail. That being said, that is certainly not the case for everybody, and I'll even admit I'm a hypocrite here, because while I say I like technicality, every once in a while I like to listen to a speaker like this that doesn't have all the technicality. It's just a more smoother experience. But something like a ELAC UB5 will have a lot more detail here. It will have a more present treble response. That tweeter will be far more active in terms of defining the picture of the sound than this will. That being said though, some of the characteristics of this tweeter are very good though. This speaker has a very good ability to not really be definable in terms of positioning with the right music. And it can actually disappear very, very well and have a kind of broad scale to the music, and it hits kind of like a wall of sound rather than a pinpoint source like a more technical speaker sometimes can. If they have an overactive tweeter, you really notice it. If you close your eyes, you can pinpoint exactly where that tweeter is. Because the tweeter here is less active than some of those more technical speakers, the disappearing act of the speaker is actually quite decent. So if you were to listen to this in a completely blacked out room, I think a lot of people would have difficulty locating the position of the speakers, even on more technical songs. But as a reviewer, I have to account for, yes, the technical performance, but also the livability of a speaker and what most people will end up liking in a speaker. And I think a lot of people like those technical experiences in short doses, but like living with something like this. So again, probably going to be for a living room environment where technicality of audiophile music isn't necessarily the focus, which doesn't mean that these are a poor performing speaker. They're just not built for the same audience as something that is hyper detail focused. This does have a little bit of a slightly shouty nature at higher volumes for the upper mid-range. It can come across a little bit beamy from time to time. I like this at slightly lower volumes, and that's primarily with singing. So when it comes to movie watching at high volumes, I actually think that this is a benefit because those vocalists are going to really cut through. So if you're watching like a Christopher Nolan movie where vocals cutting through is a problem, they don't necessarily cut through in a sharp way where it's like really piercing or anything like that. It's just a lot of presence at the maximums of what the speaker can do in terms of volume output. Now, when you're pushing any speaker that hard, can you expect perfect performance? Probably not, but it was a notable thing that I didn't absolutely love about the vocals. But I would say overall vocal timbre and vocal characteristics, detail information is fairly good. One of the other downsides about this, and one of the things I don't love about having a slightly inactive tweeter like this, is the vocalists don't have a super strong center image. This comes at you more like kind of a ball of sound and not necessarily like a tight pinpoint image like other speakers can. So this is personally an area that I like to pay attention to, that I enjoy. Again, when you're hooking this up to something like a home theater where you have a screen and you want the vocals to sound like they're coming from the screen and everything else to sound like it's coming from the environment, this speaker actually performs that task very, very well. So I would say that like most speakers, it's really about finding the environment and the type of listening you want to do. And that's kind of the user that I would suggest for this. Not the technical listener, but the more relaxed home theater listener. The imaging is, I would say, a 7 out of 10 for this price point. Certainly not the most pinpoint. Sound staging is slightly compromised because of this, because your ability to locate specifics in terms of placement in that soundstage is reduced because the imaging isn't perfect. While that is less than some other speakers, the overall depth and width to a sound is fairly good here. And I think a lot of people will be very pleased with the sound staging potential of this. Thanks again, Q Acoustics, for sending this out. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.